Welcome to the Social Psychology of Leading Clients course. In this introductory video, I'd like to talk about consumer finance, personal and family finances. When we talk about consumer finance, we're looking at consumer psychology. In other words, how do our clients feel? What do they think? How do they reason? How are they going to select between alternative solutions and alternative products? We look at the external environment and those influences, culture, family, media, the situation in the markets. And we look at our clients' attitudes, their value sets, their feelings, and their behavior. Because we're looking at the buy and sell behaviors, resolving conflicts and working with perhaps couples. And what do we do to affect transformation, changing consumer behavior in a way which is less sabotaging, allows them to reach their goals. In a very interesting book by Arch Trollstrup, 1970, and I'll be referring to this several times throughout the presentation, he wrote, one of the major aims of consumer education should be to teach consumers how to spend their money, time, and energy to bring expressed wants into harmony with considered needs. You could substitute the word goals in here, right? And all this should be done within the limits of the income of each family. When we talk about income, it's clearly money is involved. And as you've learned in other courses, money has emotion attached to it. There's a relationship with money. And a couple interesting comments during a presentation by Marty Kurtz and his colleague Andrew at a FPA convention up in Seattle, National Convention, and that workshop was entitled Cash Flow, where clients experience their money. They said, how do we have effective conversations about cash flows? Because cash flow is where we act out our money scripts. And throughout this course, we'll certainly be discussing how we can better facilitate those discussions. Well, let's move into consumer finance, or I should say household finance. Campbell phrased the term household finance several years ago, and this is the study of how households come up with decisions, how they manage their finances. And he expressed that looking at the normative household finance and positive household finance. Normative is looking at how families should optimally choose between immediate consumption and deferred consumption, which is our investing, right? And that idea that there can be rules of thumb for managing household finances. And normative household finance would really be looking at maximizing household well-being. And by doing that, this becomes the benchmark. But on the other hand, we know that families don't always act in a way which might maximize this utility. And so positive household theory is looking at actual decisions and trying to understand why the families acted in that way. And when I think about normative, in other words, what families should do, and positive, what they actually do, I think back to some of our other courses. So normative household finance might line up with maximum utility in our investments class, right? How do we maximize utility or welfare or utils, right? Or satisfaction over a period of time. And then in behavioral finance, we understand that many times our clients are not rational. The investors are not rational, particularly when market volatility gets pretty high. And then that's shifted towards how investors actually react, and that's prospect theory, the idea of loss aversions. Investors want to protect against loss more than they appreciate potential gain. So the shift was from maximizing utility to loss control, loss aversion. And I think that lines up when we look at what do households actually do. In an interesting article, which you'll be looking at during the course, Potentials and Pitfalls of Applying Theory to the Practice of Financial Education, the authors wrote, the link between theory and education is clear. Normative financial theory defines the goal, and financial education helps households who make mistakes change their behavior to reach the goal. And as they went on, they're saying the life cycle framework is now being considered a normative theory, which helps consumers to set the financial goals. So you're starting to see here that where theory and the education, the guidance that we can offer our clients start to come into play. That's an interesting article. I think you're going to like reading it. So when we think back, when we step back, we look down at the 30,000 foot level at the decision process. Well, it moves from what the perceived need, or for financial planning clients, often goal directed, right? That focus on goals, the perceived need or the goal, searching for that information, evaluating the alternatives, and then choosing the product. And this lines up with our 6-step systematic planning process. In household finance, when we're working through that process is complicated. And as Campbell wrote, Household Finance asks how households use financial instruments to attain their objectives. And in the article, which you'll be reading the first part of it, you'll see that he mentions in household planning there's a lot of different things we need to consider. First of all, goals change over the life cycle. There are finite time horizons, and within those, still we're looking at the life time horizon, but again, there may be subsets of that, planning for college funding or planning for a major expenditure. Individuals face complex income tax, estate tax, capital gain taxes, which come into play. As far as income, there is the human capital. That's the ability to create future cash flows. You have financial assets, some of which are liquid, some of which are not liquid. And when we look at the middle class, clearly the home becomes a major piece of the financial assets, and that's an illiquid asset. And borrowing constraints. And that, kind of impacts credit scores, financial assets, home equity. So all these pieces of the puzzle come into play when we're thinking about those decisions. More than that, we can kind of influencers on the decisions, physical needs, social needs, and they get into the idea of achievement, of buying something that someone wants, an affiliation, prestige, exhibition. So in other words, we're getting the psychological factors come into play. Clearly, attitude regarding spending and saving, and understanding of risk and uncertainty. All these influencers will be explored as we move forward over the next several weeks, talking about how we can lead our clients to decisions which are in their overall best value. Realizing there's a lot of influencers, a lot of noise in there that we need to address and work with our clients to move towards those behaviors which are optimal for where they want to go and the way they want to get there. Going back to the book, The Consumer in American Society, Arch wrote, if consumers will probe through the surface reasons for why a client's wanting certain things, they may get down to the real reasons and thus make more intelligent choices, and so they get the full satisfaction out of supplying their important wants. So it's, again, moving through what looks like on the surface to understand what are those values, attitudinal motivations which are driving the choice. Well, let's move on and kind of look at decision process and spending. Life cycle spending patterns, and this lines up with what I believe you already would feel comfortable with from the course you've taken this far, and you're looking at the those under 35, 35 to 65, and 65 and older, and you start to see that shift as someone moves through the accumulation stage to that pre-retirement stage and then going into retirement. There's a real shift. And for example, take a look at healthcare, lower costs, and certainly when you get into retirement in older age where there's more health care concerns, that's going to jump up, right? So this probably looks okay. Framing the situation, we have spending patterns across the life cycle. Families come up with a lot of decisions, right? They have to think about whether to buy or whether to save, what product or service to purchase, and where and when to buy that. And there are many different factors which influence the answer to those decisions. Life cycles, income, amount of income, level of education, and then the factors such as that interaction between couples, bargaining, negative reinforcement. There are emotional reasons, there are logical reasons for making a decision, and social impression, authority which might be exercised by one person over others, or an advisory role, culture, and nationality. If we go back into the literature and pulling from several years ago, I think this one comes from the 70s or whatever, originally people were looking at, well, you might have in dealing with a couple defined roles. The wife and the husband, which are shown here. Of course, this is sort of that stereotype where the wife is very involved in the household decisions, the everyday buying. The husband may be involved in the larger purchase decisions. But again, I think as you look at this as sort of maybe a foundational place to start, we need to ask, do those traditional decision patterns, do they still exist with your client? Are your clients fit that, or is it more of a non-traditional family where maybe both the husband and the wife are working? There might be more shared decisions in there. It may be completely flipped, the husband staying at home. So you need to understand what are the dynamics of your client's decision making. Is one person making most of the financial decisions? And if so, how do we move beyond that? How can we proactively start to bring both the clients into the decision? Because as you are certainly aware, that if you have one spouse who's making those decisions, the chances of retaining that second spouse after the death of that first spouse are going to be very low. And we see as many as 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 moving on to different planners. How do we engage both clients in proactive engagement? Where and when do the children factor into the decisions? When we look at gender, and we'll be exploring this during the term, Professor Stephen Hawke out of Wharton wrote, women think of shopping in an interpersonal, human fashion. Men think of it more as a job to get done. And sort of summarizing some of the ideas that professor wrote in that article that you can access down there. If you look at the female consumer, comparison shopping, shopping for bargains, it's a shopping experience, an interaction with the sale associates, negotiations, very efficient, perhaps buying in there, loyalty to a store, and as he suggests here, that might be really reflect the people who are there. While on the other hand, you may find the stereotype male, quick decisions, avoid the crowds, get in and out, on a mission to buy something, and friendships might come into play, particularly maybe if it's cars or larger purchases. And I read somewhere the idea that it might even go back to the hunter-gatherer mentality. The idea, hunter, one key objective, get that, the gatherer, gathering a bunch of different items for the needs of the household. Now, whether or not this lines up, it's again maybe a decent starting point when we realize that in working with clients on consumer finance, household decisions, there's going to be some conflict, there's going to be some compromise, there might be some division of roles, and we need to understand the dynamics. Again, what you see here simply maybe a generality, a stereotype, which might be just a starting point to see how does that play. Is there a straddling of both areas? Does this sort of line up? I thought it might be interesting to just throw the slide in shopping for financial services, and you can see information about decisions and how do clients come to you? Where are they shopping for financial services? How are they getting there? Standard of living, or perhaps the idea of keeping up with the Joneses. Going back again to Trollstrup. Why are American families the richest in the world and yet so often in debt and unhappy? He suggests we need to consider the possibility that the real answer may be that many families are very confused about what standard of living they ought to have. That idea of standard of living is quite important because it clearly will be thinking about how do we manage expectations? How do we have this discussion about a sustainable standard of living? And when we start with standard of living, we probably once again or initially start thinking about the family budget. And here's a slide from kind of show you the breakout between different places. But we start thinking again about fixed expenses, variable fixed, discretionary spending, and of course taxes. And this will certainly change where you're living, where someone is in a life cycle. And if you think back to the introduction of financial planning, when we were talking about those key personal financial ratios that we might be able to use as a starting point in the conversation, I think standard of living, we start with thinking about those necessary living expenses, those choices, those where the family can start to think about how to allocate that. Factors influencing the budget, family situation, future needs and goals, and of course a lifestyle choice that we're talking about. In researching standard of living, I thought this was interesting from the Insolvency Service of Ireland. They said a reasonable standard of living is one that meets the person's physical, psychological, and social needs. And a reasonable standard of living does not mean that the person should live at a luxury level or subsistence level. It's that balance. A standard of living which represents a balance and is sustainable given the client's situation. I think that's an interesting idea. But when we're keeping up with the Joneses, you start to get the idea that, as you certainly see in this country, high use of debt at the expense of savings. And you can see on this table right here, almost none or borrowing is around that 20% level. So 80% of the people being surveyed, which is probably indicative of the country, the idea that it's going to be moderate, if not a great deal of borrowing. That certainly has the flip amount on what's going on in savings. Credit card spending. Trollstrup had a really interesting observation in his book. Charge account customers purchase 3 times as much as a cash customer. And why is that? This is an issue we looked at in behavioral finance, because when you're using a credit card, the use of the credit card stimulates the part of the brain associated with pleasure. On the other hand, reaching in your pocket to pull out cash, that's shown to engage the part of the brain associated with pain. So there's 2 completely different issues being here with the use of credit cards. So in our discussion of lifestyle and sustainable budgets and those decisions which over life, maximizing lifetime or the smoothing of lifetime consumption, prudent use of credit cards, we have to have these conversations and realize there's a lot going on there, helping our client move to better behaviors. So how do we lead our clients to more informed decisions? To behavioral change, including reasonable consumer debt. Savings behavior, which is going to help the client achieve their needs, future needs. appropriate investment choices, the proper use of debt and bringing in debt refinancing, when to use insurance. So all these sort of issues and more will be discussed in the following weeks as we start to explore how we can effectively lead our clients. Behavioral change. Certainly, as we engage with our clients, we're talking about money, and money has an emotional power. And we explore those attitudes about money. What does your client believe about money? Those money tapes, those core attitudes and beliefs. Is money an enabler? Is it a tool, to achieve growth or achieve what the person's want? Is this a source of status? Do they think it's a symbol of success? Is it comfort? Does it represent security? For some, it's a proxy for love. Is it a route to happiness? Is it a burden? Is it a source of evil? Is it deserved or undeserved? All these attitudes have major impacts in the way the client's going to behave. Citing a few quotes from the Trollström book regarding relationship with money. Individuals entering into marriage bring attitudes, impressions, and expectations created through years of acting differently. So we know coming into the marriage, there's going to be different mindsets. That's going to create conflict. Money management is the most frequent cause of conflict among couples. Well, we can expect that, but look at what the quote moves on. In the upper third or fourth of families according to economic status. So many of the clients you're working with, higher net worth. Because there's finances there, cash flows, it doesn't mean that money is not going to be a major source of conflict. For example, I recall a story in which there was a major conflict because of spending by one spouse. That spending on high spending on, or what looked as out of control spending by the one spouse, really was a reaction in the other spouse's work and a lot of things going on at work and kind of the ignoring a person. There was a lot of emotional issues in there. If money stands for success and perhaps authority, then the manipulation of the family income and spending takes on emotional relationships, clearly. And it kind of goes back to that story right there. Money is emotional. It is, and it has to be part of our conversations. And as going back again to Marty Kurtz's and Andrew's conversation, they put up a slide that looked like this. And they said, when we talk with our clients about life, their situation, and we talk to them about finance, again, cash flow overlaps both of those. That's, as they said earlier, cash flow is how we act out our money scripts. It also is that tell, per se, for financial decisions, life decisions, and that has a lot of information. Clearly going to be a big piece of our conversations. Well, let me just summarize this short foundational video in which I hope to just introduce to you consumer finance, household finance, some of the decisions, the issues that come into play that we'll be exploring throughout the next 7 weeks. I came across an article by a number of authors called Personal Finance, an Interdisciplinary Profession, from the Journal of Financial Counseling and Planning. And in that there was a line that said the profession of personal finance is based on theories from several disciplines, such as family studies, economics, psychology, sociology. We'll be looking at all four of these disciplines as we move through this course. So, I want to welcome you to the course. I hope you found this introductory video interesting, and I know that the next 8 weeks are going to be quite fascinating as we together brainstorm and share ideas on how we can better understanding our client lead them to more informed, more productive decisions. Okay, best of luck as you move through the course.